All right, I think we should probably get going on this. So good morning to everyone who is joining us, or good afternoon, or whatever time it is if you're watching the recording of this webinar. This is, of course, the HAPI/FHIR 5.7.0 release webinar, as well as the SMILE CDR 2020.02.R01 release webinar. We have, of course, codenamed this release Sojourner. We'll talk a little bit about what that name comes from in just a moment, but welcome to the webinar, and thanks again for joining us. So, as always, we'll be covering this morning what is new in the product, what we've been working on over the last quarter, as well as what's coming up over the next quarter. And as we've been doing for the last few releases, we'll close things off with a little Q&A time. So if you've got any questions around that. Just to start off, as we often do, I will sort of remind everyone of our general release cadence around here. We do, of course, do quarterly releases. This is our February release. Our next release, of course, will be in May, followed by August, then followed by November. And we have these days been pretty good about sticking to that schedule. We've gotten pretty predictable around that, which is great. So we'll be talking about everything that we've been up to for the last quarter here at SMILE CDR. So this is, of course, our 19th named release. We have been advancing alphabetically through the alphabet. I don't know. I don't even know what we're going to do when we get to Z. We will see. Who knows? But we have a little while still before we get there. So we'll see. Sojourner. So Sojourner, when this name was proposed as our release name, it sounded familiar, and I wasn't even totally sure what it was. And of course, as soon as we looked it up, I remembered it was that awesome rover that went and explored Mars a few years ago. And I realized, we've had much bigger and frankly, much more successful Mars missions, since then. I personally have been just obsessively watching the progress of the James Webb Space Telescope as it, hurtled itself out into position out in space and is slowly assembling itself and unfolding all of its parts. And I can't wait to see pictures start to come back. I don't know, I love this stuff. So neat to kind of think back to the days of Sojourner when it was the new hotness that was out there exploring Mars. I never actually had spent much time thinking about Sojourner, and certainly nothing here I even was aware of. First off, I'm blown away by the fact that Sojourner was the size of a microwave. All the pictures made it look like it was a giant beast, but as it turned out, it was this little tiny robot that was rolling around Mars doing its thing. And we've got a few other interesting facts that are all sort of listed here, which I think is kind of neat. Finally, I will mention Sojourner is actually named after Sojourner Truth, who was a women's rights activist. There's an amazing story there. I certainly won't get into, but I spent a bunch of time reading up on that as well, and would highly recommend doing the same. Kind of a neat thing. So there we go. Moving on from there, let's talk a little bit about what we've been up to as a company before getting into the product. So first off, and this is a momentous achievement for everyone who was involved, and I can't say congratulations enough to the team who worked on both of these things. We have now been certified both for ISO 1345, which is a quality management system for basically software as a medical device, as well as, of course, the famous ISO IEC 20001. We have achieved both of those certifications. A huge congratulations to the whole team, and certainly specifically to Lewis, our CPSO, who has put countless hours coordinating and wrangling everyone and getting this all put together. We're all very proud of everyone who has done that. I'll also mention, so our second annual symposium will be happening this year, the SMILE CDR Symposium. We've changed its name, so it's now called the Intelligent Health Data Symposium. We did this last year, and it was frankly, it was a surprising success. I always expected it would be good, but just the quality of the talks ended up just being excellent. I think everyone who was there really enjoyed it. This is a virtual experience, so we'd love to have you join us. The website is here on the screen. By all means, check it out. We'd love to have you join us. And I've seen a sneak preview of the agenda. There's a lot of really good stuff going to be on this. Certainly lots of detail around SMILE and around HAPI/FHIR and various sort of informative sessions on how to do things and lessons learned and experience, but also a number of talks and other things as well. So lots of reason to attend that. Also worth mentioning, we will be, not a bunch of the team, I'm actually not going to be there, but a bunch of the team are headed to Florida later well, not later this month, but partway through next month, we'll be at the Vive conference, which is March 6th to 9th in Miami, as well as HIMSS, of course, which is the 14th to the 18th in Orlando. We would love to chat with you. So if you're going to be at either of those conferences, do shoot us a note. We would love to meet with you and talk to you about what you're up to. So moving on to product, I will talk a little bit first about our community survey. We do, of course, within HAPI run a community survey. We try to do it every year. With the pandemic, we obviously fell behind a little bit on that. It's been a couple of years since the last one, but we launched our community survey in October. Had a bunch of people fill it out, and certainly a big thank you to everyone who did that. These surveys are really important to us because they help us sort of gauge, importantly, what we should be working on, what we potentially could stop working on if we want to make decisions about architecture. They help inform those as well. So super, super useful data when people fill it out, and we do really appreciate it. I figured I'd take a minute just to go through some of our lessons learned from the survey. It was a really short survey, so I'm pretty much going to give you the entire results of it. We try to keep it minimal. First off, we asked a question around what version of FHIR are people using, and I will say, honestly, the results surprised me. I was not expecting DSTU2 to come in nearly as low as it did. It's no surprise, of course, that R4 is vastly more popular than the other releases. It is the current it's the current release, so it makes sense lots of people are using it. It's also got regulatory push in a number of countries, including the United States. So lots of reasons to use R4. But I was expecting, given that there are lots of production systems that I've heard of being built on DSTU2, I certainly expected to see higher numbers there. And I'm surprised to see that that number is as low as it is. We have had people ask, both from actually within the HAPI community as well as outside of it, are we thinking of dropping support for DSTU2 as we did for DSTU1 a few years ago? I will say I don't think these numbers are low enough yet that we could seriously consider dropping DSTU2. So if you're still using it, don't worry. This number doesn't mean that we're going to be dropping it the next year. But I do think it's safe to say DSTU2's days are numbered. So I think the most likely outcome here is we'll run another community survey, probably starting again this coming October. And yet again, we'll poll the community. And if it seems by then that almost nobody is using DSTU2, then maybe it will be time to drop it by then. So if you're using it, don't worry, you'll have a chance to have your say and tell us, no, don't do that. But maybe, who knows? We'll see what happens. There is an upcoming release, an upcoming sort of unusual release of FHIR called R4B. There's a long and complicated explanation for why R4B exists, and I do not want to get into it here because it will take a long time to explain, but certainly happy to talk about it in more detail elsewhere, or maybe even during Q&A if people want to know about that. I will say we do, of course, have draft support for R5 right now. R5 is currently slated to be released by HL7 at the end of calendar year 2022. We support current drafts, and the moment it's final, we will of course support the final version of it as well. We will be adding support for R4B in probably the next month or two. That work is almost complete. So that will be added pretty quickly as well. Next question we asked was around various parts of the FHIR specification that people were using. I'm not sure what we were hoping to do with this question. I just think it's interesting to know, are there any parts of the spec that nobody is using? Because maybe we can stop prioritizing those. I don't think there's even anything really surprising in the results here. Validation, of course, is always a hot topic, and no surprise, it is the most commonly used feature of FHIR among HAPI users. Graph definition is probably the most esoteric thing. Frankly, I'm surprised its number was as high as it is. That's probably the only surprising thing here. I will say the question that we asked in the survey broke this into 4 categories. I'm not currently using it, I will never use it, I'm planning on using it, and I do use it today. These numbers reflect both the I'm planning on using it and the I'm using it today numbers. So that was how we grouped them for this slide. Finally, and this is probably the most important question we asked, at least as far as our internal planning goes. It's kind of an esoteric thing, but it's important to anyone doing Java software development. What version of the JDK do you need to support? What's your minimum? And what would happen if we were to upgrade you? This is a contentious issue. Anyone who has been watching the various channels, there's a long heated debate going on the JPA server starter GitHub GitHub project. There have been debates on Zulip in the last while. Lots of people have lots of opinions on this, and I certainly get them all. I will say, though, HAPI, as I mentioned on one of those tickets, has now we've been in this business for 22 years now. And one of our biggest aims with the project has always been to have minimum requirements that are not exclusionary. We do understand that people use our software in lots of settings, and those settings include super modern software, super modern servers running in the cloud, but they also include low resource settings. They include laptops that have been locked down by corporate environments. There's lots of reasons that upgrading JDKs are hard, and we want to be respectful of that. We do also realize, though, that end of life is coming for JDK 8. In fact, it comes right at the end of March 2020. So the days of us being able to support JDK 8, I think in good faith, are coming to an end anyhow. So we really do need to start thinking about upgrading. The good news there, as you can see from this slide, is that if we take JDK 11 as our minimum upgrade path, close to 80% of people said they would be okay with upgrading to that more or less in the next month. And certainly if we went higher than that, that number increases even farther. So I will talk about our plans for that in a couple of slides, but I did think this was a really interesting result. Changing gears a little bit, I was talking about performance over the last couple of release webinars. In fact, during the Q&A last time, we even had a few people asking us about some comparative white papers that have been written by other FHIR products and asking what we might do to respond to that. So I will say we have embarked, we've embraced this. I've never really liked benchmarks a whole lot, and if you read the blog post that goes with this, you'll see my rationale for not liking it. But as I said in the post, ultimately benchmarks are data, and data is a good thing, and people need data to make decisions, and of course we get that. So we decided to embark on a pretty serious program of running benchmarks and have published our very first one. The results are all available up here. I'm not going to go through them here because I think the post really does do a good job of speaking for itself and explaining where we're coming from and all of that. But I will highlight a couple of things. I mean, all of this benchmarking was done specifically on AWS using EC2 and Aurora Postgres as a platform. We are intending to benchmark other database types, other cloud providers, other hardware configurations, all kinds of things like that. So watch for more of these posts coming in the next while. We know that people use Smile CDR and HAPI in all kinds of environments, and we would like to give you good numbers and good data to go to make your decisions wherever it is you're planning on deploying. I will also say all of the numbers here, certainly this was all tested on Smile CDR. I don't think it's exclusive to Smile CDR. If you are a HAPI user, you will certainly have more work to do in order to build a properly scalable cluster that distributes load equivalently across your cluster and manages itself and all of that. These are all features that this is one of the reasons people might choose to use Smile, because it does have all of that stuff built in. But I think with the right configuration and the right cluster design with HAPI, all of these numbers should be exactly achievable as well. And I will say to anyone who's looking to squeeze out maximum performance, not everybody has that as a need, but if that is your need, and that is lots of people, I would certainly recommend going through the settings that we set within this blog post. We have tried to be very, very explicit about exactly how we achieved this performance, exactly what settings we had, exactly what configuration we had. We did that, I mean, partly so it was reproducible, but partly because we figured the experience of how we got there would be helpful to other people who are trying to get there for real. So hopefully that'll be a useful asset for other people trying to get good performance in the world of FHIR. So what's new in this release? Naturally, performance is an ongoing theme. We talk about it pretty much every webinar this time, or every quarter. Lots of stuff has happened. The MDM module has really seen actually a pretty dramatic sort of architecture shift, where it now does multi-threaded ingestion, processing, and matching. This was one of the biggest limitations of the previous design of MDM, was that it was single-threaded for doing matching. And of course, if you're trying to do matching in real time, then that single-threaded aspect of it really slowed down your ability to move data into the system quickly. That is no longer a limitation, which is super cool. There's a couple of caveats on how you could do multi-threaded processing, but they're all documented, so well worth looking into. We have started to take further advantage of, we're saying Lucene index here, and really mostly for real people using this stuff, it comes down to the use of Elasticsearch specifically. But we have added new data in our Elasticsearch indexes and our Lucene indexes for search parameters that allows you to, among other things, do some additional text-based searches. But we're moving a bunch of other stuff in there as well, just because you can get really good performance for certain types of searches by taking advantage of the additional firepower you get from a system like Elasticsearch. So lots of good stuff there if you're trying to build just an absolute top performance system. Delete expunge is a new operation we've added. This is, as the name kind of suggests, this is used to both delete and then expunge delete either a subset or even all of your data. That has been converted into what we call a batch process, which means that it operates very efficiently over all of your data. Very neat stuff, as well as a whole bunch of changes and additions to the last n operation to make it even more powerful. I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into exactly what last n does, but it is a really neat item. We've also added a couple of new configuration items, and of course, Smile and HAPI are just full of configuration settings and knobs you can turn depending on exactly what your needs are. Two validation performance enhancements we've made. First off, we've added the ability when you validate a bundle, we've now got an option where we will take that bundle and validate each individual resource in it individually, which means that if you have lots of threads, cores available to you and really big bundles to validate, this can certainly dramatically increase how quickly you do those. We've also got the ability to turn off validation of contained resources, which it's a pretty niche thing to need, but there are a handful of people out there that have specific use cases where that can be super useful, because it really does speed things up if you've got a lot of contained resources that don't need validation. So subscriptions have come along. We've done a lot of work there, and subscriptions, of course, I've said this many times, subscriptions are one of these little hidden gems in the FHIR spec that I think most people who are adopting FHIR don't realize is there until one day they have a need and they suddenly realize, wow, I can't believe this feature has been there all this time. Subscriptions, of course, is not just a HAPI FHIR or Smile CDR thing. It's part of the core FHIR spec. But I think it's an underappreciated one, and I think our implementation is pretty darn good, so there we go. What we have added this time around, first off, and certainly most importantly, because it's been asked for quite a bit, is the ability to use subscriptions on a partitioned environment in a way where the subscriptions are partition aware. Previously, you were able to use subscriptions in a partitioned system, but the subscriptions were not partition aware, meaning they just they ignored partitions entirely and sent everybody's data, which was okay for some use cases, but absolutely unacceptable for others. That is no longer the case. So this will now work in exactly that mechanism. Similarly, we've now got what we're calling delivery retry handling built into the subscription system. What that allows you to do is basically sort of specify if we're unable to deliver a payload, instead of the current behavior of just keep trying until you succeed, we've now got the ability for you to sort of specify how many times do you want to try, and ultimately do we want to send this off to a dead letter queue if we can't deliver it. Finally, this is a little bit of mostly prep work for the upcoming R5 version of subscriptions, although there was another internal reason we had to make this architectural change. We've now got the ability for subscriptions optionally to send deletes as well. This is sort of an extension to the FHIR spec in R4, just because R4 didn't actually allow for this, but it is a part of the R5 subscription model, and we've got the ability to do this in R4 as well. On the MongoDB front, so we continue to evolve our support for the MongoDB storage engine within Smile CDR. We have added support, of course, for the bulk data export operation, which is super exciting. We have added support for the _tag search parameter, which was if anything, just an omission that I don't know how we missed when we did our initial implementation, but that has been fixed. And then this is probably the most interesting one to me. We added support for GraphQL on Mongo. Previously, we only supported that on relational. We now support this on MongoDB as well. And as you can see, I've got a little bracket there on the slide. Something that I'm excited we'll be talking around next month or next quarter is the ability for you to do GraphQL introspection operations within both HAPI FHIR and Smile for both MongoDB and relational databases. I'm not going to talk any more about what that means, and if you don't know, well, you're going to be super excited when I show it off next quarter. This is Really only going to be interesting to the developers in the house, but I tell you, GraphQL introspection is really neat. We have made a bunch of documentation enhancements as well, mostly sort of going through exactly what is and what isn't supported in the MongoDB implementation of the database, of the storage module, already with all kinds of examples and sort of differences and stuff like that. So number of documentation enhancements there. If you are sort of adopting MongoDB at this point, I would certainly recommend spending a bit of time going through the new documentation we've added around that storage engine. Finally, member match, the $ member match operation. The member match comes from the pair-to-pair Da Vinci implementation guide. It is a specific operation that was outlined in one of the IGs spelled out by Da Vinci. We have added support for that operation within Smile CDR. So for anyone who is trying to do pair-to-pair data exchange, and that of course includes anyone who's using the Smile CDR implementation of pair-to-pair, but also certainly could include anyone who is building their own solution to pair using our product. This operation will be available to you as another tool in your tool belt as you operationalize that whole system. So I was talking earlier around JDK versions, and this is I guess this is where we announce what we've decided to do. I will say we don't take decisions around this kind of thing lightly, because we know this is going to cause a little bit of operational pain for people. But I will say we thought long and hard around, should we upgrade from JDK 8? There are two reasons I think it is the right thing for us to do now. The first, of course, as I said before, is the fact that, actually, I guess there's three. The first is that JDK 8 is really coming to end of life at this point. So, you know, it's not going to receive any further updates. It feels like anyone who is using a platform like this really should be on a supported version of a JDK. So we do recommend people upgrade anyway. So it feels like it's probably a good reason for that. Secondly, our survey certainly did reveal that very few people are still requiring JDK 8 support. Not none, but certainly few enough that we felt like it was this was a compromise we could probably make. Probably most importantly, I will say one of the biggest learnings we had over the course of running our benchmarks in the last quarter were that JDK version makes a remarkably surprising difference in terms of performance of the system. And I'm talking, you know, exact same data load, exact same hardware configuration, exact same everything. I found in many of our tests, we found that upgrading from JDK 8 to 11 would give you sometimes up to 20% better processing, and then going from 11 up to 17 would give you another 20%, which is honestly a remarkable improvement for having done absolutely nothing. It really was a surprising finding. So at this point, it just feels like it is worth the effort to get yourself onto a modern JDK. So what does this mean for anyone who's using the product? It means a couple of things. Our next major release, we're going to be treating in HAPI as a major release. So the next release will be HAPI 6.0.0. We're doing that for a couple of smaller breaking API changes, but mostly we're making that major bump because we will be bumping our minimum JDK version to 11. We are also committing to 1 year of critical security fixes. So if you're not able to upgrade from JDK 8 immediately, do not fret. We're not going to leave you in the lurch on either Smile or on HAPI. We will be maintaining critical security features for 1 year for both of those products. Every time something is discovered, hopefully this will never happen, but if it does, we will absolutely backport to both of those release lines. And there we go. So that will be it. The other thing I will mention is we are going to try and embrace a strategy and a philosophy of being a little bit more aggressive on JDK upgrades. In the whole history of the HAPI project, which, as I said at the start, has been 22 years, we have upgraded our minimum JDK version. This will be the third time we've done it in 22 years. I suspect we are going to increase that frequency. This just seems to be the way the world is going. And I think there's lots of reasons why it's a good strategy. So I don't expect we're going to stay on 11 for the next 5 years as our minimum requirement. However, there is lots of opportunity to consult. So no more changes will be made without yet another community consultation. And it is important to us that we continue to do that before we make big changes like this. Quickly, I will talk about a couple of sort of adjacent parts of the solution. First off, Appsphere. To anyone who doesn't know Appsphere, Appsphere is it's a module within Smile CDR that can be used effectively to provide a complete app management platform for people who are launching either internal facing or consumer facing API ecosystems and want ways for discovering and enabling the apps that take advantage of those APIs. It is a really neat system. If you haven't seen it before, highly recommend sort of checking out all the details that we've got up on the internet about them. I won't go into all of it here because that's not our point, but it is really a really neat system at this point. It has become incredibly robust and has been quite well received by the people who are using it. Specifically, we've added a number of sort of administrative features that make it easier for you to onboard new apps, including the ability for developers to upload images and videos that can be, that can help explain what their app is. We've got ability for previews to be created, as well as this nice approval mechanism that sort of gives you a good workflow for approving content that's being proposed for your marketplace, or for your gallery rather. So I think I think these are all going to be really, really useful features for people who are rolling out this kind of thing. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about our pair-to-pair or P2P solution. Pair-to-pair, of course, is, well, these days completely a US focused thing, although I think there is applicability to the solution in other parts of the world. Although, of course, right now what we're doing is frantically and furiously implementing the various implementation guides that are being churned out by the brilliant people at the various Da Vinci projects. We have, of course, launched a pair-to-pair solution built on top of Smile CDR. It is a separate set of modules and a separate UI, but it is built, of course, on top of our platform and complements it well. The solution is live and functional and has been rolled out to customers already, so it does work. We continue to iterate on it, though, so to give you a sense of where we're going with this product, we are over the course of the next couple of months rolling out features for granular consent, which is an entire sort of ecosystem in itself, allows you to do all kinds of things around allowing your members or your patients or whatever it is to make very, very focused decisions around what data they want to share and to whom. We're going to be adding support for detailed tracking of provenance, for delegation, meaning the ability for you to sort of delegate that you'd like other people to have access to data, or for you to receive delegation where you are going to receive access to other people's data for various reasons, as well as sort of this ability to initiate data transfers when you enroll new members. So quite a bit of new functionality going into the P2P solution over the last while. And there we go. So I'll say finally what we're going to be working on in other parts of the product over the next quarter. On the Smile CDR front, we will be adding, as we've just added support for partitioned environments for subscriptions. Next up is MDM and HL7v2 enabled environments. We have currently got support for automatic export of CCDA and CDA documents. We are in the final stages of building the reverse of that, the ability to ingest CCDA documents and to convert them to FHIR and store them, which is super cool. That will be showing up shortly. A number of enhancements to MongoDB, including finally support for the very famous and very popular $ reindex operation, as well as the $expunge operation. These are probably the two most requested things by MongoDB users. Yes, we are working on them. And finally, more benchmarks will absolutely be coming, as I said before. We've got a number of them planned, actually, which is going to be, I think, quite fun for people to see over the next while. On the HAPI front, I'm really excited about this one. We are finally in the real final stages of bulk import implementation. I almost feel like a broken record. I've been saying this for probably a year and a half now, that we're almost done with bulk import. I did mean it every time I said it, but it was never actually quite there. I always thought I was closer there. I thought we were closer than we were, and it always ended up taking longer. At this point, it's really, really close. It's to the point where there is an open GitHub ticket. You can go and check if you're interested. It is fully functional. It isn't tested yet, which is the only reason I'm not going to say it's in the product yet, but we do have a working bulk import implementation. It will be in your hands very shortly if this is something you're waiting for. As well as ongoing work on Elasticsearch. So the stuff I was talking about before will continue to evolve. On the Appsphere front, of course, one sort of key thing missing from our gallery right now is the ability for you to launch apps directly from the gallery. That will be remedied pretty shortly, I think. as well as the ability for easier integration with third-party external terminology servers, just because this is a thing you can do today, but it's clunky. So we're improving that flow a little bit over the next while. So this takes us to the end of what we've been up to. Thank you everyone who has joined us today, and hopefully this is useful information for everyone. We are of course always happy to hear feedback on any of this. Feel free to send us a note or ping us on the HAPI/FHIR mailing list or anything else. And with that, I am going to hand over to Jason, who will be leading us for Q&A today.
Fantastic. Thanks,
Jason, of
James.
course, is our product manager for he oversees product management for all of Smile, certainly including our core product Smile CDR, but as well as all of the other products we develop here.
Great, thanks, James. Yeah, it's been a busy quarter and lots of exciting new things in the products, and all driven by our engagement with our community. So thanks to everyone who's joined the call today. We're taking questions. We're available for the next just under a half an hour now through the YouTube chat. So if you have any questions coming out of what James has spoken through today, please fire away. And while I'm waiting for those to come through, so whenever I hear the words hidden gem, I think that there's probably some value in there that some of our users might not understand, some use cases that they could power through the use of Smile CDR. And so you use this term today for our subscriptions functionality and around partition subscriptions. So can you speak more about the power of that, if we have a few minutes here in the Q&A, about what that could be used for?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm thinking maybe I'll talk a little bit about the power of it, and then I'll give Ken a chance to talk about exactly what's changed, because it is quite neat right now. As I said before, subscriptions to me are I think hidden gem is the right term for them. I mean, they're not a secret. Lots of people do use them. They're not limited to our solution. Certainly any capable FHIR server out there probably has an implementation of subscriptions. So lots of people know they exist. But I think most people, if they're new to the FHIR spec, these are one of these things that people don't realize initially is there. And then, they'll suddenly realize they have a need. And it turns out subscriptions has been there all along and is this amazing solution to that need. I've seen this happen so many times with users of both Smile and HAPI over the years. And I just think it's a really neat system. Subscriptions, if you're not aware, are really just a pub sub mechanism for FHIR resources. They allow you to specify, it actually gets a whole lot more complicated, but also a whole lot more cool in R5, in the upcoming R5 release. But I'll describe this in terms of how it works for R4, because it only gets better after this. They allow you to sort of express something as a FHIR search. And that FHIR search could be something really broad, like all encounters and all patients, or it could be something micro-focused, like, all abnormal blood glucose observations for males over 50. Like, doesn't matter how tight it is or how broad it is. If you can express it as a FHIR search, you can turn it into a subscription. And what that means is the FHIR server will just start telling you every time a resource passes through the FHIR server that meets that criteria, which is really neat stuff. I mean, the use cases are just all over the map for how you might use this. There's real basic ones like, simple replication. If you've got an architecture where you want to replicate a copy of your data from one system to another for various purposes, maybe one is your online transactional system, the other one's being used for analytics or reporting or something, or maybe you've got geographic replications or something like that. I mean, these are all use cases I've seen in the real world. Subscriptions can do that, but subscriptions, just as easily, they can power, apps and really dynamic applications that need to sort of change when new information shows up. So, if you think about, if you're building a dashboard that shows a bunch of patients on it, and you want an icon to show up every time a new lab result comes in for that patient, or you want, you wanted to have Spark lines constantly updating with vital signs or something. Like, these two are all use cases I've seen people build on top of subscriptions. And I mean, we're really just, scratching the surface of what it's capable of. Subscriptions in HAPI, FHIR, and Smile also don't just have to deliver FHIR payloads. They can actually invoke code as well. So you can kind of think of them like people love these ideas of sort of building Lambda functions in AWS that are, event driven. Subscriptions in a way, I mean, I'm not saying they're the exact same thing, but they sort of allow you to do this similar thing where you can write bits of code and have that code automatically get executed in response to some data condition in your system, which there's just so many neat things you can do with a capability like that. And we've seen it time and time again. So I'll stop droning on like a geek about this, but to me, it's just one of the neatest parts of the FHIR spec. And I love seeing what people do with it. Maybe at that, I mean, Ken, what's changed in the last release?
Sure, just the partition support, as James mentioned earlier, in the previous release, subscriptions were non-partitioned resources like other search parameters, I think, are non-partitioned. We have a collection, there's a list on the documentation of which resources are not partitioned. They apply to all the partitions. Subscriptions now, when you create one, is a part of the partition it is created on. So if you create a subscription on partition X, now it's only going to match resources that are coming in and written to that partition. So that's the main change. One thing that's interesting is that we finished that, and that is working as expected. And then we turned our attention to MDM and quickly realized that we actually need to be able to support still be able to support subscriptions listening for all partitions. So just to let you know that in the next release, there's going to be an extension to subscriptions that allows you to also create a subscription that listens to all partitions. So.
Fantastic. Thanks, James and Ken. And the YouTube chats are heating up, so don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll get to the first one here. Are there any changes or plans related to the terminology server? And that's from DJ.
Oh, interesting. So I guess I'll say there is actually one change that made it into this release that it occurs to me. I think I had added a slide for it, and I must have accidentally deleted that slide or forgotten to copy it into the right spot because we didn't mention it in the webinar, and it's entirely my fault. There's actually one significant change did go into this release that's worth talking about with regards to the terminology server. We have for a long time supported this idea of pre-calculated value set expansions, and this is, to me, it's actually quite a nice feature in HAPI and Smile. What it means is that when value sets are added to the system, we'll sort of calculate the expansion and then store the expansion in a dedicated set of database tables, which is useful because it allows you to do that expansion really, really quickly. It basically acts as a cache for the expansion of the value set. So if you're using that value set for UI purposes, or more importantly for validation purposes, it's much, much faster if you've got this pre-calculated expansion for it. We've supported that for a while now, but one of the drawbacks of that design is that it was often sort of unclear. Are you seeing a live expansion or are you seeing the pre-calculated expansion? And if for some reason the pre-calculated expansion was no longer good for you, like maybe the underlying code system has changed and and the value set is no longer aware of it, it was kind of hard to deal with that fact in previous releases. As of this current release, we have introduced a new operation called validate expansion. And what that does is it actually tells the system, don't use the pre-calculated expansion, kick off a new background job to recalculate it. Until that's ready, just use the live expansion. So this is super useful for anyone who is doing anything really even remotely fancy with terminology, because it is a common scenario that you will be changing your code systems and want your value sets to reflect that as well. There is also, I guess the other thing I'll mention, there's some new status information when you do value set expansions. So when you expand them now, you get this really nice status message as a part of it that will say, this expansion is based on a pre-calculated result that was calculated at, it tells you the timestamp it did it. So, and if it wasn't, then it tells you it's a live expansion. So there's a bunch of neat stuff there. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, head over to the HAPI FHIR server and try expanding a value set. You'll see the status message I'm talking about. It is live on that server already. So that's probably the biggest change around terminology in this release. I'm glad you asked that. I can't believe I forgot about that.
Thanks, James. Sounds like a good slide.
It was. I don't know what happened to it.
We've got a Mongo question. It seems like the Mongo interest is picking up every quarter. So Jens is asking, will support for MongoDB continue to be a smile only feature?
So yeah, thank you for that. I will say at this point it will. We don't have any plans to open source that particular work in the near term. Certainly, I will not say never. We have absolutely taken things that were written, written internal and decided that they merited being promoted up to the open source work. Our entire MDM followed that exact pattern. We started that as a proprietary thing and just decided there was so much community value in having it out there that we decided to open source that work. We've done that lots of times, and we do, of course, remain deeply committed to the important open source work we do. We absolutely continue to support HAPI, and frankly, there are aspects of it I think we need to do better on. Certainly, our support of the starter project is one of those aspects. But I will say, to be totally clear, we don't have any immediate plans to open source the Mongo work.
Thanks, James. The next one's around MDM. So Alex is asking, will the multi-threading capability of MDM be complete in the next release, or is it the next quarter's release?
Ken, you want to take that one?
Yes, I fully expect it will be. The pre-release, if you're following pre-releases, will actually probably be available in March. So definitely we'll make them a release.
Thanks. You spoke quickly about R5, James. So we've got a question from Vladimir around what are our plans for FHIR R5 support and Smile? Sure.
So I guess, the thing I will say is R5, of course, is still a moving target. And that is very much by design. Like the FHIR community itself continue to iterate on the R5 design. They're planning on, I think that goes up for ballot later this year. And I was told by Graham Grieve maybe 2 weeks ago that he believes strongly that R5 will be released this calendar year, as in 2020 calendar year. So as the target moves, we continue to support it. There is up to the day, well, not completely up to the day, but very close to up to the day support for the current integration builds of R5 in HAPI. We actually have never added those to Smile CDR only because nobody has ever asked us to. We have never had a single customer of Smile ask for R5 builds. If anyone ever does, then we will add them that moment. It just isn't worth supporting that unless somebody's actually going to use it. So anyone today that wants to do R5 needs to do that within HAPI. The second R5 is finalized and released, we will absolutely be supporting it, just because we already do. So we will upgrade to the actual final versions of those definitions, and we will support those as well. So I guess the short answer is R5 is available today if you want to take it for a spin. I think it would probably not be a great idea to use it for production scenarios yet, just because the data models are still changing within HL7, but we're getting pretty close to being final for R5. We will see what happens there.
Thanks, James. We've got one more question in the Q&A, about 15 minutes left, so we've got time for anyone's got more questions to put in on the YouTube chat. So BJ is asking if the subscription system of Smile can be hooked up to an external pub sub provider. So for instance, webhooks published by an EMR.
Ooh, wow, what a fun idea. So I guess, Ken, if you have anything you want to add to this, please. But I will say today, not so much. We do have, the closest we've got to that exact request is there is an ability for you to designate the way that our system works is the final journey in a subscription payload before we send it out is it goes on to what we call a delivery queue, or a delivery channel, actually. And that channel can be backed by a few things. Typically, it's an ActiveMQ queue, or it's a Kafka stream, or a Kafka topic, rather. And of course, from there, it's queued up, and then it's sent to our delivery code, and it gets sent out. We do have the ability for us to skip that final step. And this has actually been fairly popular for some users, just because what we can do there is use subscriptions, have Smile CDR or HAPI do all the calculation of is this a delivery candidate, and get it ready for delivery and all of that. But ultimately, just drop it on a Kafka topic and leave it there. And what customers will often do then is they'll write some sort of consumer that is pulling these things off of these Kafka topics and doing whatever it is they want to do with it. That might be ingesting it into another system, or writing hooks into other applications, or populating databases. We've seen all kinds of interesting use cases of that. I suspect that might be the solution to exactly what you're talking about, but it might not be, truthfully. I mean, we've certainly talked about other potential backers for subscriptions. One of the neat things about it, I mean, it's Jason was sort of picking up on my use of the word hidden gem earlier, and honestly, I think there's two of them that are sort of worth highlighting. And we've talked about both today. Subscriptions is one of them. Partitioning is the other one. The reason I think they're kind of neat is that, you know, I mean, it's pretty obvious what you do with like the patient resource or the observation resource. I mean, I'm never going to get surprised by how people use those things. Whereas subscriptions and partitioning are the exact opposite of that. You know, we had maybe one or two use cases in mind when we built the system. And we've seen people do those use cases, but I mean, 90% of people who use those features are doing it for things that we had never conceived of. We tried to come up with a flexible design to allow people to do those crazy things that we'd never thought of, but this is part of the joy of a system like this, is people can do really interesting things with it. And I suspect, I mean, I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm probably not even appreciating all of the nuance of what it would mean for subscriptions to be backed by EHR hooks, but I bet there's something really cool in there, and that's probably worth talking about more to see, you know, how could we make that happen.
Thanks. We've got a question from Seth, and we might need an acronym check on this if you don't know, James, whether we have any thoughts on CPG on FHIR.
CPG, uh-oh. That's probably clinical practice guidelines. I'm gonna assume. I think I even participated in that project, but it wasn't called that yet at that point. Right. I'm gonna do my best not to embarrass myself. I'm not gonna look that up, and I'm gonna pretend I know what I'm talking about. I think what we're talking about here is the attempts to use. And please do, to the person that submitted this question, if I'm getting this wrong, maybe type it in the YouTube channel and Jason can interrupt me. But I think what we're talking about here is the ability for you to use CQL to execute best practice guidelines and sort of ultimately deliver recommendations back into the system. There is a great implementation guide being drafted around exactly that. And I will say we are massive supporters of it. I was actually personally a participant in one of the WHO funded projects that was initially sort of developing that. I've had to drop off just because of time constraints, but I know that there are a number of really brilliant people who continue to iterate on that design, and we are massive supporters of it. Worth mentioning, of course, we do certainly within our product have support for CQL execution, which is really the biggest building block that's necessary to do things like CPG on FHIR. And we do continue to work with, to iterate on that as well. We are, of course, very good friends with the brilliant folks at Alphora who developed the reference CQL server, which is, of course, based on HAPI-FHIR. We've got that fully integrated into our product suite, so all HAPI-FHIR and all Smile CDR users have the potential to take advantage of that capability. We have, over the last 2 years, made a number of performance enhancements to it. We continue to iterate on performance, and we've got a bunch of ideas there on how we can get it even better. So, I mean, I guess ultimately, yeah, we haven't made a focused effort to specifically support the CPG on FHIR implementation guide. It actually occurs to me that would be a great idea for us to start tracking it a bit closer, but we do certainly have all of the building blocks today. And I know there are people who have built systems on our platform that are implementing that exact specification.
Thanks, James. And it's been clarified your spidey senses were correct. That was the CPG in question. So thanks. And we are getting increasing interest in CQL functionality and everything around clinical decision support. So that's a great topic to expand on. There's a question around HAPI-FHIR moving to version 6 and the breaking changes. Can we say now if there are going to be central radical API changes within HAPI?
All right, yeah, that's a good one. So I'm going to say, I guess I'll say this: we're not going to make any sort of radical changes. This is naturally, this is an API that, or a library that is used to store health information. I don't think we have the luxury of being able to make big breaking radical changes. Like it's just too important for us to be taking that kind of cavalier attitude, as much as I would love to, because it is really fun to make big refactors that sweepingly improve everything. However, we have discussed internally a number of smaller changes to come And if we're ever going to make actual sort of API changes, this is certainly the time to do it. So we are planning on taking advantage of the major release to make a couple of tweaks. I'm honestly kind of blanking on what they are. I don't suspect any of them will be terribly big, and there will be some messaging on the HAPI/FHIR mailing list over the next while as we ponder what exactly goes into this release. The one that does occur to me is we have talked a bunch, and I think we'll probably try and proceed with this. Around moving from the native types for modeling dates, date times, and instance. We currently use the ancient Java date type as the native format for that. There are much better types in Java for that were not available prior to Java 8, oddly enough. And back when we started the library, we were on Java 6, so we couldn't use them. It really seems like it would make sense to replace date with things like local date and local time, which are much more capable classes for modeling that stuff. Probably a lot of people have no idea what I'm talking about. It's a pretty trivial change, but it is a breaking change, and that's one thing I'd like to see go in. I will say, if anyone has ideas for things they'd like to see changed, this is the time to get them out. So probably the HAPI/FHIR mailing list is the right place to bring those.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. We've got a few more questions, which will bring us about to time. The first one is, where will the cache for the value set expansion be stored, whether it's in Elasticsearch?
Oh, interesting. So today, and I guess we have no plans to change this in the near future, that lives purely in a relational database. There's no memory cache, there's no Elasticsearch there. We do use Elasticsearch for terminology expansion, but it's actually, it's oddly enough, it's not used to store the pre-calculated expansion. It's used to calculate the expansion that ultimately goes on to be stored as a pre-calculated expansion. That's a bit of word salad, sorry. And ultimately, I guess, I'm thinking through, is there any reason we would move from that design? Certainly anything we can do to improve the speed of value set operations is good, because they get heavily used in terms of validation. But I don't think we have any plans to move that into Elasticsearch. I will say, as a part of the last round of changes, there is a change that's in there that does a short memory-based wrapper around the disk cache. So there, if you're doing validation of the same code in rapid succession, or expanding the same value set in rapid expansion, if you do it 10 times in 10 seconds, that'll be one trip to the database and not 10, which is I didn't even mention it, but that's a small tweak that has happened in the last release. I don't think there's any plans to move that into Elastic, though.
Thanks, James. Next question's from Rupendra. So he's asking whether we have any plans to support more sources for bulk import, like from an SQL database.
Ooh, I love it. So bulk import, what is implemented at this point is HTTP ND-JSON, well, actually HTTPS ND-JSON, and that's all that's implemented at this point. That is not where we stopped, though. We just needed to get something out, because that's of course the most important import point. Where we go from here, I think, is going to depend on what people ask for. So this is really an opportunity for the community, both of HAPI/FHIR and of Smile CDR, to have their say in terms of what we add to bulk import, because you're absolutely right. There are some great alternative sources. The logical one to me for us to do next would be things like, Amazon S3 buckets and the equivalent concepts in Azure and GCP, because we know a lot of people do use those systems in this way, and it's actually quite easy to write a syncer that will pull things in from those sources. So that feels like a logical place to start. Honestly, the idea of slurping that data out from a database, I had never even thought of that, but it's actually a really neat concept. So that feels worth talking about for sure. I don't see why we wouldn't try and come up with a solution like that if there was a need.
Great, thanks, James. And I'm not sure I've heard the term slurping when talking about before, so I learned something here too. The next and the last question we have for now, we probably could fit in another, is, are there any plans to open source the OAuth support for the JPA server?
Interesting. So I will say on that one, I think it's a little bit clearer to us that no, there are no plans to open source that work. This is a thing that people ask about from time to time. And honestly, it's a tough balancing act for us. We as a company are deep supporters of open source and the power of open source. We invest heavily in our HAPI/FHIR library, and continue to see it as a public good for the world. That we're very proud to invest in the way that we do. That said, I mean, we have to draw a box somewhere around what HAPI-FHIR is and what it's not. And there's lots of things that it's not. I mean, HAPI-FHIR is never going to be a user database, for example, because there's a million great products out there that do exactly that. It's never going to be a monitoring system because there's lots of great products out there that do that. Like there's just, we have to draw a box around what we want this library to be. And one of the lines we've drawn is that all of our support for specifically the actual mechanics of the OpenID Connect protocol as it relates to Smart on FHIR are a part of SMILE CDR. We've drawn those outside the box of HAPI-FHIR. This doesn't mean you can't do Smart on FHIR with HAPI-FHIR. It absolutely does not. Certainly HAPI continues to have things like the authorization interceptor, the consent interceptor. There's a number of other building blocks there, and we continue to invest in those. In fact, there's some really neat features being added to authorization interceptor as we speak. So certainly all of the building blocks are there, and we know lots of people have built up Smart on FHIR ecosystems on top of HAPI-FHIR, but I will say, certainly at this point, we have no plans to open source our work there. And unlike with Mongo, I think Mongo, we may well at some point decide that we want to open source that work. I think the security work, we've just decided that's firmly outside the scope of what a FHIR library is.
Thanks. And that was the last in the chat. Sometimes there's one that sneaks up as I'm trying to wrap this up. But it's been great participation today. And thanks for all the questions. I think that timing-wise and interest-wise, this has been one of our best yet. So thanks for everyone who's joined us and got our discussion going in the Q&A here.
Yeah, thank you for all the great questions. They've been really interesting questions this time around. And on that, goodbye. Thank you, everyone.